So brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. And just, I suppose, one thing to mention as well, to remind everyone on the call, is that we recently kind of revamped the webinars available now at Athena. So there's kind of three real categories of webinars. So the first is kind of the customer journey that we're doing today. So again, that's where we can kind of talk to schools about their real life experience and practical experience of using Athena. We have our refresher webinars, which are really kind of, I suppose, geared towards, if there's new kind of features on the tracker that you want to kind of come and see, how do they work? And also if there's any maybe new teachers in your school that have joined and that need some kind of training on the tracker, the refresher webinars are ideal for that. And then also there's focus groups. So the focus groups really is where we will go through, what's kind of new in the tracker, but also we'll receive, really want to hear, I suppose, the school's suggestions and any feedback you have about, you'd really like to see this new feature on the tracker. And we can kind of, go discuss a bit about maybe the feasibility of those features and so on. So yeah, again, that's all available on the website. So please do have a look around. If you're interested in any of those, that's all there to you. So I will bring it back to Mark. So he's kind of the star of the show today. And we might start off, so Mark, by just kind of, I suppose maybe we might start off by asking you, why did you decide to go ahead with the Athena tracker?
Thank you, Noreen, and good morning to everyone who's here. Firstly, I think it might be just helpful to put this into context that my decision to go with Athena was partly informed by my prior experience as a deputy head in charge of academic and then as a head in the UK schools. So if I can just briefly comment on that, the Ofsted model in English schools of inspection was increasingly data-led, and judgments would be made partly using academic data. Now, I had been a deputy head and a head of schools in the independent sector, and even though our model wasn't as data-led as Ofsted, we were still under an inspection model that did require schools to use data to show progress of students. There was also within England at the time a desire to use pupil data to support the tracking of pupil progress, particularly through their exam years, so in the UK system, GCSE and A-level. So I had experience of it in two roles, as a deputy head academic and then as a head. The two parts of that use, one was the tracking of progress, and then secondly was the review of department performance on an annual basis. So I then was fortunate to be offered the opportunity to take the headship up at the King's Hospital, and I moved here in January 2019, which in normal calendar years isn't that long ago, but obviously now that it's pre-COVID, it seems like a lifetime away. But prior to COVID, I wanted to introduce the use of data for both monitoring academic progress for students and also as part of an evaluation process. And that's what led me to engage with Athena, and that's why I decided, partly driven by prior experience under models used in the UK, and then seeing that Athena did something similar within Ireland.
Brilliant, super. That's great, Mark. And it's great to hear about your kind of, your experience in the UK and kind of what, the landscape, I suppose, of tracking was like, when you moved to Ireland. And I suppose, can you tell us a bit about the process then of going from maybe just you using it in your school to maybe that kind of rollout and, the kind of the wider staff members taking it on board then in your school?
Yeah. I was I was really conscious, and I'd sort of picked up this concern as well when I moved across. I was aware that some of the teaching staff, understandably, were concerned that because I was ahead from the English system, that I might want to adopt models of tracking and review that would be more like the Ofsted model. So I was very wary about the sense of the idea of copying and pasting from a different system. Secondly, having introduced the use of this data in 2 separate schools, I also had the wounds and scars of previous engagements with colleagues in terms of introducing the use of data. I think it's really important to understand that there are real concerns that colleagues hold about the use of student data. The fear that it will be used by management as a stick to beat them with, or that it leads to a more challenging relationship with the students and their parents if suddenly that a child is not making the academic progress that they aspire them to make. So the process then of trying to address what I also have sympathy with these concerns, particularly because actually the debate and conversation was already evolving in the UK before I left. Because there was a healthy skepticism about the degree to which you use this data. So in order to take on board those issues, the way that I went about engaging colleagues in the conversation was, first of all, with a whole staff meeting and laying out the why in terms of wanting to use Athena in terms of both supporting student progress and monitoring, and the ability to reflect on prior achievement. And I also, at that whole staff meeting, named the concerns that staff would have, because I'd experienced them in my previous 2 schools and I didn't expect them to be any different here. And what I then did was set up a King's Hospital data working group and offered any member of staff the opportunity to put themselves forward to join that working group. And I also made sure that the people who I knew who were real data skeptics, I made sure that at least had 1 or 2 of those data skeptic colleagues on that working group, because I think it's really important to have the debate about the concerns and to set the parameters. Because for me, one of my what's really important about this, the use of the data with Athena, whether you're using it for student progress or whether you're using it to reflect on subject performance, for me, data should inform a professional dialogue. It should not be a judgment on professional performance. And I think what's important then is about setting that in the context of the looking at our school and the school self-evaluation model.
That's brilliant, Mark. And I think you raised so many good points there in terms of, having a working kind of data group and also getting on board, the actual more skeptical members among staff, because, there's always going to be people who are, they have a healthy skepticism, and definitely we should encourage that, and we want them to challenge. And I suppose having that representation in your working group sounds like, a really great way to address that, and to hear all voices, so that's really great, Mark. And as well, a lot of schools, I think they do kind of, some of them they will harbor that idea that, you know, it might be a threat to teachers, and,
Yeah.
you know, it's about monitoring teachers. So again, just like you said, the transparency and communication, having that all staff meeting where you're really going through all those points
Hmm.
is really
Hmm.
excellent to tackle that. That's great. And I suppose just kind of coming a little bit deeper then into, you know, would your school be showing, you know, the students the results from the tracker?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that first of all we have to put the context of the context of COVID is important in terms of how it's impacted on our journey. It's had both a positive effect and it's also had a delaying effect. So the delaying effect was we set the working group up and we were working towards the use of the data, and we had made the data available to all staff. But more to give them the opportunity to look at the data without without there being a requirement on using the data, just to give teachers and pastoral leaders the confidence to see what the data looked like on the students that were sat in front of them. The tracking data, which gives the indication of expected results, a minor benefit, and I feel there are not, there are not, I'd rather us not have had COVID, but we've had it and are still experiencing it. I think one of the positives, bizarrely, was actually around the junior cycle. We couldn't use the data with the accredited grades process, but the expected results data was quite useful for colleagues who were then needing internally to do junior cycle results. And we've had to do that 2 years running now, and have stuck to the mantra that the data should inform a dialogue. It is not the end judgment. And I think the benefit of us being able to use the tracker expected results as part of the information in our junior cycle process was that it's actually given teachers a real life opportunity to see how they can use the data with children they've taught over a couple of years, and also not going to be held account to it because we adopted the same process as you would have had nationally at the Leaving Cert, which was there was no questioning of the teacher's judgment. So that actually was a positive. Coming on to the issue though now about sharing the data with the students, I have a really mixed view on this, and we need as a school to go back and have a real debate. I'm going to just touch on my previous experience to highlight why I have a mixed view on whether you share the data. In an ideal world, I think it would be good, and it can be good to share this data with the students. I have done it twice in my 2 previous schools in England before moving here. However, I'm not sure that it generated a benefit that I had anticipated. I understand the benefits of sharing the data with children to give them a sense of what they're capable of, and there is benefit in supporting students to think about what they might want to aspire to. So I can see that it can work, and if you are going to do it, you really need to train teachers really carefully on how to interpret the information. I think it's important not to place ceilings on children's aspiration. Secondly, it's about the data's one piece of information. So, for example, you might have an expected result for a child who's studying French, but what you don't know is that one of their parents is French, and they might own a gîte in the Pyrenees, and they go there every winter to ski, and actually they might therefore have an even greater motivation to a similarly able child sat next to them to want to do really well at French. But the teacher will know that. It doesn't mean the data is not of value, but it does highlight the need that the data is part of the conversation if you're going to do it. I think you've also then got to be mindful about the importance of educating parents. and this can be the tension between school, the teacher, and the parents. So, for example, if you were using it in Leaving Cert and the expected result is a H1, well, the risk of sharing that with the parents, and then what happens if the child doesn't get the H1, and that can end up in quite a tense relationship. That said, I have also seen that using this data have a really powerful impact. This is an anecdote, but it is to highlight there were students in my first school where I was a deputy head, and the data was being used but not shared with the students. This boy had English teacher who was to meet him in terms of addressing his conduct. He actually was quite an able boy. He'd broken his leg playing rugby right at the start of term. Rugby was his passion, and this isn't condoning his behaviour at all, but I think he'd become and he admitted this, that he'd become quite a frustrated and angry young man. And so we were talking about his behaviour, and then I just shared with him the expected results profile for him in English, and he cried, broke down in tears. I don't think the purpose of the data is to make children cry, but the point of this is that it actually enabled me to have an even deeper conversation with this young man, in both challenging his behaviour, but also showing him that actually if he worked with his teacher, and she was a great teacher, that actually there was something for him to lift himself out of his current anger. So I can see the benefits of sharing it. I've done it. I've not seen the benefit personally, but that doesn't mean that you can't gain a benefit from it.
Great. That's excellent, Mark. And it's great to kind of hear both sides, because it's not a black and white issue. There is no kind of simple, straightforward answer to that type of question. But definitely, I think, like you mentioned, it does come back to, the judgment as well of the teacher and the guidance, and being able to kind of select the scenarios in which maybe this would prove powerful. So definitely it's not a kind of panacea, and it's not a replacement, for any of that, professional judgment as well. That's really great. And I suppose, since you've gotten the tracker, has there been any kind of surprise findings? Maybe has it unearthed anything that you weren't expecting?
I think where the tracker is really helpful and supportive within a school, both for the classroom teacher, but also the tutor and the year head, is that as schools, even without tracking systems, schools tend to be good dealing with the most able children and the children who are may be presenting as problematic, not fulfilling their potential. And we know, of course, there can be a range of reasons for this. The hard thing for schools is dealing with the middle, the kids that turn up each day and do the right thing, but they don't necessarily excel at the top end, but they don't necessarily cause us any challenge because they're not necessarily disruptive. In fact, there was a really powerful presentation, I think it's by Colm Nocta, UCD professor in adolescence psychology, recently. And he said, and he was talking about the impact of COVID, and he said the real challenge for us as educators is to focus on the 4 to 7 children. So the children who identify themselves in terms of their commitments, who might be an 8 or an 8 to 10, we probably like them as schools because they're working really hard, but we've just got to be a little bit careful that they're not either suffering from the anxiety of perfectionism, or that they're getting their balance wrong, or creating anxiety there. And clearly the children whose effort is a 1 to 3 is of concern too. But actually being average and 4 to 7 is good. The benefit of having data like the Athena tracker is it actually forces you rightly to look at every child that sits in front of you. because we are responsible for the progress of every child, and that is the real benefit to me. The surprise that you get is the reminder of every child in the classroom.
That's excellent, Mark, and definitely kind of music to our ears, because again, that was one of the goals of the tracker, is to not kind of forget that kind of middle strata, so that's really great to hear. And I suppose that the last question that we have for you then is in terms of, do you have any advice maybe for both maybe schools considering choosing the Athena tracker, and also maybe schools who are very new to starting out using it?
Yeah. You may have seen it yourselves. It's on YouTube as a TED talk. I think Simon Sinek on why is a useful reminder to us of setting the context of why we want to do something. And I do feel that I actually can, I feel stronger about this, having moved away from the way the model was set up in the UK into Ireland. I really like the looking at our schools model here for us in Ireland, and the requirement for us to reflect that school self-evaluation model, which does require us to ensure that we consider the progress of every child, which is the motivation for using the tracker, because as a classroom teacher, that is our responsibility. And then secondly, if you're then going to look at the outcome of what children actually achieve about what we expected, it is ideally suited for questions that I think we should always be doing within a self-evaluation model. Is what am I doing well, and how do I know? And the data can be one piece of information to support that. And what can I do better? And in order to do better, what support I need? Those are actually the questions we would ask of a young person, where we use the tracking data with them, when they reflect on their academic progress. And it is also the question we should be posing of teachers. And for me, that then takes it away from being perceived as a top-down threat and a stick, because actually it is rooted in the concept of the teacher as a professional. And as a professional, I do believe we have a responsibility to reflect on what we do well and what we can do better. And that, to close and to repeat, the data should inform a professional conversation. It is not the judgment on it, but it certainly helps and strengthens.
Super, that's brilliant. Thanks so much, Mark. Great insights there, and a lot of things to chew on. So, I'm sure that's answered kind of a lot of hot questions on people's minds today. We do have some kind of questions that have been sent in from some of our attendees. So I think you've covered a lot of this stuff already, but I suppose there is some question from Kieran in maybe just, I suppose, the involvement of getting staff on board with this kind of this tracking model. And I suppose, do you have any advice for Kieran on how to get teachers to engage with the tracker, and do you measure how much it's being used?
Yeah. So just want to quickly refer back to my experience in England, because I hope it exemplifies. In my first school as a deputy head academic, we spent a significant amount of time engaging, first of all, with heads of department or subject coordinators, and in terms of how we would use the data and giving a reassurance on that. We then spent time with whole staff meetings in terms of training. We held a parent consultation. We actually got representatives of parents of each year group to come in, and we shared the data that we had available to us as a school, and informed the way we would use the data and the way we would communicate to parents as well. So we invested a lot of time in engaging with staff and parents about how we would use the data. When I went to the second school, where I then became a head, that school was performing better academically than the school that I had left. It was it had a much stronger tradition. And I assumed, and this was a big mistake, I assumed because these subject coordinators were in a school that was performing strongly academically, that they would be okay with the data, and I couldn't have been further from the truth. And I made a mistake by not laying the groundwork of consultation first. So that would be lesson number one. Before you even bring the data into school, you need, as I said at the start, you need that staff meeting, and you then need to get a working group, and the working group must include data skeptics. The next thing I think you must do is then actually give the data to the teachers and the form tutors, just so that they can see it. Place no expectations on using it, but just make it available. Because what you want is once it's reassuring, it's for individuals. And what in any of these changes, it's about there'll be groups of teachers who actually are really interested to use the data, and if they can start to have conversations in the staff room where the data isn't as frightening as they thought, and actually does seem to reflect, Jack and Mary who may be sat in front of them, that is helpful. The issue about how do you monitor its use? So, for example, that if you're using the tracker data, it's monitoring its use will depend on the model used. So if actually you decide to go down a model of target grades, actually it's quite easy to see that it's being used, because you'll have generated a target grade. That obviously doesn't necessarily mean it's having any benefit, but you'll have shown that the input has happened. Probably my preference about you sharing it with the data and encouraging staff to use it where they think it appropriate, that's obviously going to be harder to get some systemic quantitative sense of use. However, you could use the poster responsibility review process, where post holders might need to include it in the annual review that's submitted to the Board of Management.
Brilliant. So the proof will be in the pudding, really, if they are, using that data. Excellent, Mark. We have a question from James, and I think you've covered a lot of the points already. But I suppose, if you do want to add anything to maybe how our staff may be using it on a more kind of maybe day-to-day basis, and whether you've decided to give access to Athena to parents.
Yeah. So the access, so we do give, so teachers have access to the data. And at the moment, that is for them to choose how they may wish to use it. The reason why we haven't formalised it is bluntly because of the impact of COVID, and we had to suspend the data working group. And the reality is we haven't been able to allocate the time to restart that group. We will be, because we're also it'll be aligned with a poster responsibility review that we're doing again in January. So we are going to work towards formalising its use, but it is available to staff, and we encourage them to be able to access it. Parents, no, not at this stage, for the concerns that I've shared previously. I think it's really important for staff to have confidence in how the data is used. I do understand, though, once you get this data technically, that parents can access it under a data subject access request. We've not encountered that at the moment. What we will give parents access to is baseline testing when they come in. So I'm happy to share the baseline testing result, because you can give information. The piece around expected results, I'd be more wary about.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as I'm sure many schools will be. That's great, Mark. I think you've answered that for James. And I suppose the last one we have sent in then is, maybe, so it's from Elaine and she's asking, at the end of a school year, do you have kind of an evaluation process in place for the Athena tracker in order maybe to justify to your board of management, if you want to resubscribe for the following year? So any kind of metrics that you use, or maybe it's qualitative?
Yeah, twofold. The So we use both the tracking data and the results review data. So the results review data is fairly straightforward to show its value to the board of management, because we share the outcome of our, leaving cert and junior cycle results with the board of management. And there's the real benefit in using Athena, where it sets it against national trends. So that's really good. And, that's actually information that the board was looking for anyway, fits into the looking at our school. So that's fine, that's good. The piece around justifying the tracker, we will be able to tie that in with the model that we're going to be moving towards with our pastoral system, and that would be done qualitatively through the review process that a post holder is supposed to undertake each year. So that's the way in which we would be, justifying. And for me, we're going to justify the use of the information to the board of management by sharing it with the board of management, in effect, it being used.
Yeah, which is the greatest, I suppose, indicator of success, really.
Yeah.
That's great, Mark. Brilliant. So I suppose that's all the questions we have sent in. If there's anybody on the call now that either wants to come off mute, feel free to, and you can also turn on your camera if you wish, or you can even pop your question on chat. So we'll kind of open it up to the floor now.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Dan. Yeah, no, just what way do you see the system evolving in your school? Is it individual teachers of individual subjects having that conversation? Or do you see like a group of teachers that are trackers? Or what way do you see it evolving in the school?
Yeah, two parts to this. We still, I still want to make sure that whatever use we make of the data, that we do it through the working group, because it's really important in terms of retaining confidence of colleagues. That's the first point. Secondly, to answer your question about, we give access to class teachers or subject teachers, and that is for them to use as a reference point in terms of the children in front of them. In terms of formalizing the conversation, we're going to be doing that through our pastoral system, because I think it's the thing that one has to be careful with is, as soon as you start to talk to children in a systemic way about the data, the parents will know. And you've got, because even if the school doesn't tell the parents, the children will, because they'll tell them the conversation they're having. So that is the piece around having a systemic conversation between the tutor and the child about their progress and referencing the data. That is something that we will be looking to do moving forward. We're not currently doing, but that is because of the disruption we've had with COVID.
And do you see that happening at specific times in the year, or is it a continuous process?
Yeah, no, we would want to do it have the conversation connected with reports, and because we do have conversation, we do encourage a reflective conversation after reports anyway. This would be about introducing some information to support that. So along the lines of being consistent with informs the conversation, not the judgment.
And would you see them then setting targets or not setting targets?
I've very mixed view on that.
And then from your previous experience,
yeah,
the system that would have followed, so I've identified students that are struggling or have issues, what programs or what systems would you have done?
Yeah, so we would then so that generates a what's the reason for the underperformance. So, for example, sometimes, as we are aware, the underperformance can be a signal of pastoral issues that may exist either within school, or that there's an issue that's happening away from school. So you to try and understand the reason for the underperformance. Is it pastoral? If you don't believe it's a pastoral but is linked to academic, then have we identified any specific learning need? So certainly need to engage a conversation with SEN to try and understand. And then, for example, if you get to the point at which a young person may not need some specific learning support, or it may not be a specific pastoral intervention, and actually it's a young person who's just drifted off rails and just needs to get back to the basics of, on time to class, all materials with them, then that's probably looking at placing a child on a report for a period of time. So I think you need to understand why before then deciding the pathway.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. But ultimately, you see it then as your tutor system?
Yes.
Tutor that's going to take ownership of this.
Yes, without a doubt. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Paul. And we have a question from Dennis. So I suppose, Mark, he's just wondering what you're referring to when you mention results review data.
Okay, so we're talking about the Athena tracker data today, which looks at a child's potential and what they could achieve in the future. And what I do like about that is that I should have mentioned this earlier, that Athena allow you to feed your own data into that, and I think that's a real benefit of it, because that starts to make it personal to the child. But the results review, that is a separate sort of product or service that you can get from Athena, where they will take the results you get, for example, your students actually achieve as the outcome at leaving cert or junior cycle, and then they will compare those results with what would have been expected of the child. And also it is helpful because they set it against national trends. So the results review is offered by Athena. It's a different service. Great. But I do feel that really sits very neatly within the Looking at Our Schools framework.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. And that's it. So we refer to kind of that as their Athena report. So you can find more information on that as well, Dennis, on the athena.ie website. Brilliant. So if there's any more questions, we can take them now. I don't see any more coming through in our chat. Paul, did you have any other questions or?
No.
Brilliant. Okay, great. So we'll let you you're free to go. So Mark, and thank you so much again, for your insights. Really great stuff, and a lot of different things that you do. And it's really great to kind of hear that, that voice of experience as well with tracking. So we really appreciate your time, Mark. Thank you so much, and thanks for everyone for joining.
Sorry, Noreen, yeah. I am happy to share my email with those people who've been on the call today. I'm happy, if you wanted to contact me separately, because certainly from my own experience, which has been both at times positive, but I can't deny there have been moments of pain. I cannot underestimate the need to share and support with each other in the journey. And secondly, it's definitely in the planning and taking time. I wouldn't rush the introduction. You do need colleagues to feel confident with it. But once they do, I think it's a really good thing to do it.
Great. That's a great point to go out on, Mark. And thanks for your generosity in offering that. That's brilliant.
All right.
So we might finish the recording and we'll send that back to everyone as well. But yeah, just thank you so